Picture this: 1942. The most feared man in Nazi-occupied France, Klaus Barbie, a butcher from Lyon, slams his fist on the table and angrily exclaims, "I'd give anything to get my hands on that lame Canadian bitch." The walls of occupied France are covered in wanted posters. The Gestapo's entire double agent network is mobilized. Their mission? To find and destroy a single woman who makes the Third Reich look like a complete fool. But the thing is, no one knows who she really is. They don't know her real name. They don't even know her nationality. All they know is that somewhere in France, a lame woman is single-handedly coordinating prison escapes, sabotage operations, and intelligence networks that are undermining Nazi operations from within. The Gestapo's message was crystal clear. She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her. They never succeeded. This is the true story of Virginia Hall, the wooden-legged American spy who became the Third Reich's worst nightmare. And if you think you know everything about World War II heroism, I'm sure you've never heard a story quite like it. Before you dive into this incredible story, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Believe me, you'll want to see how this story unfolds, and there's more to come that will blow your mind. Let's get started now.
Baltimore, Maryland, 1906. Virginia Hall was born into wealth and privilege, the daughter of a successful banker. Society expected her to do what all proper young ladies did: marry well, host parties, and fade quietly into the background. Virginia had other plans. From the very beginning, she was what her own mother called cantankerous and capricious. While other girls her age practiced needlepoint and piano, Virginia was out hunting, wearing men's clothing, and once showed up to her elite high school wearing live snakes wrapped around her wrist as a bracelet. She wasn't just eccentric, she was exceptional. Class president, editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, captain of the field hockey team. Her classmates voted her most original of our class. But Virginia wanted more than Baltimore society could offer. She studied at Radcliffe and Barnard, mastering French, Italian, and German. Then she did what adventurous young women weren't supposed to do. She went to Europe, Paris, Vienna. She set her sights on becoming a U.S. Foreign Service officer, ready to represent her country on the world stage. The State Department had a different idea. Application rejected. Why? Simple. She was a woman. In the 1930s, only 6 of the State Department's 1,500 employees were female, and they weren't about to make it 7. The message was clear. No women. Not going to happen. Virginia Hall refused to accept that answer. If she couldn't enter foreign service through the front door, she'd use the back door. She took a clerk position at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, then transferred to the U.S. Consulate in Smyrna, Turkey. She was in. Not in the way she wanted, but she was working overseas, and that was a start. Then came December 8, 1933, a day that would have ended most people's dreams of adventure forever. Virginia was out on a bird hunting excursion with American friends in the Turkish countryside. As she climbed over a wire fence, she stumbled. Her shotgun discharged. The blast shredded her left foot beyond repair. Despite desperate attempts by surgeons to save it, gangrene set in. The decision was made: amputation below the knee. For most people, this would have been the end of the story, the end of adventure, the end of dreams of serving her country in exotic, dangerous places. Virginia Hall wasn't most people. She was fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg that she named Cuthbert. She learned to walk with it, to run with it, to do everything she could do before. The State Department still wouldn't promote her to the diplomatic position she wanted. Her prosthetic leg was now just another excuse on top of her gender. But Virginia wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. When World War II erupted in September 1939, Virginia Hall was living in Paris. As the Nazi war machine rolled across Europe, she saw her chance to serve. If America wouldn't let her be a diplomat, maybe France would let her be a soldier. Well, not exactly a soldier. Women weren't allowed in combat roles, but they were allowed to drive ambulances. So Virginia Hall joined the French Ambulance Corps, Service Sanitaire de l'Armée, as a private. She received training in first aid and ambulance driving, and when the fighting started, she was there. May to June 14, 1940. Virginia worked around the clock, racing through bombardment and gunfire, pulling wounded soldiers from the carnage, driving through the night to field hospitals. She saw the worst of war up close. She saw bravery and cowardice, heroism and horror. And then she saw Paris fall.
France surrendered. The Nazis occupied the northern part of the country, while the southern region became Vichy France, supposedly independent but really just a puppet state doing Hitler's bidding. For Virginia, it was clear. It was time to get out. She made her way through Spain to England, arriving in London just as the Luftwaffe began its bombing campaign during the Battle of Britain. The U.S. Embassy in London wanted her first-hand intelligence about the situation in France, so they hired her for the Defense Attaché office. But Virginia knew this was another dead-end clerical position. She'd been dodging Nazi bombs in France. She'd driven ambulances through battlefields. She wasn't about to spend the war filing paperwork. And then fate intervened in the form of a chance encounter. In 1941, Virginia met a British intelligence officer named George Bellows. He was impressed by her courage, her language skills, and her intimate knowledge of France. He gave her a telephone number for a friend in London who might be able to help her. That friend worked for a brand new organization that was so secret most people didn't know it existed, the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. Prime Minister Winston Churchill had created the SOE with a simple, dramatic mission: set Europe ablaze. This wasn't about gentlemanly warfare. This was about sabotage, espionage, and guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines. This was about doing whatever it took to make the Nazis' occupation of Europe a living hell. There was just one problem. The SOE had never employed a female field agent. Women weren't considered capable of operating in combat zones. They weren't thought to have the physical or mental toughness for undercover work in Nazi-occupied territory. Virginia Hall was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. After 6 months of failing to successfully infiltrate a single new agent into France, the SOE was desperate. They looked at Virginia's resume. American, fluent in French, knew the country intimately, gutsy as hell, had literally already been working in France during the war, and, crucially, she was willing to go back into occupied France, knowing full well that if the Gestapo caught her, she'd be tortured and executed. The SOE took a chance. Virginia Hall became their first female field agent deployed to France. After intensive training in Britain, learning radio operation, espionage tradecraft, weapons handling, and survival skills, she was given her cover story. She would pose as an American journalist working for the New York Post newspaper. In August 1941, Virginia Hall arrived in the Vichy region of France. Codename Germaine, cover name Brigitte Lecontre. She was 35 years old, walking on a wooden leg with reddish hair and an unmistakable American accent. On paper, she should have been the worst spy in history. Too conspicuous, too noticeable, too foreign. Instead, she became a ghost. Virginia established herself in Lyon, the heart of central France and the center of the budding resistance movement. She checked into a convent, and through a combination of charm, persuasion, and appeals to patriotic duty, she convinced the nuns to help her. She befriended the owner of a local brothel whose employees gathered invaluable intelligence from loose-lipped German officers. She recruited farmers, shopkeepers, railway workers, and students. She built a network called Heckler that would eventually include some 90 agents across southern France. Her journalist cover was perfect. She could ask questions, meet people, travel freely, and no one thought twice about it. She filed actual newspaper stories to maintain her cover, but her real work was far more dangerous. The Heckler network gathered intelligence on German ammunition depots, fuel supplies, troop movements, and industrial production. She encoded this information and sent it via Western Union telegram to her cutout at the New York Post, who forwarded everything to SOE headquarters in London. But intelligence gathering was just the beginning. Virginia coordinated safe houses for downed British pilots who had been shot down over France, helping them escape to Spain and eventually back to England. She organized supply drops of weapons and money for resistance fighters. She recruited a local doctor, John Rousset, who established an asylum for the mentally ill, not to treat patients, but to hide Allied agents and escaped prisoners until they could be smuggled out of France. And then came her most audacious operation, the Mauzac prison break. 12 SOE agents had been captured and imprisoned at Mauzac. These weren't just any agents. They were trained operatives who, if they could be freed, could return to the field and lead new resistance networks. Virginia planned their escape with meticulous detail. On July 15, 1942, all 12 men escaped. They hid in the woods while the Gestapo launched an intense manhunt, and by August 11th, Virginia had safely smuggled them to her network in Lyon. From there, they were moved to Spain and eventually back to England.
The SOE's official historian called it one of the war's most useful operations of its kind. Several of the escaped agents later returned to France and became leaders of new SOE networks. For the Allies, it was a triumph. For the Nazis, it was an absolute humiliation. The Germans were furious. The Gestapo flooded Vichy France with 500 additional agents. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, stepped up operations. They focused on Lyon, and they focused on finding the mysterious person coordinating these operations. They knew there was someone, they just didn't know who. But they were getting closer. And they had a clue. Someone had reported seeing a woman with a limp. Klaus Barbie, even the name sends chills down the spine of anyone who knows World War II history. As the Gestapo chief in Lyon, Barbie was known as the Butcher of Lyon. He personally tortured prisoners, Jews, resistance members, Allied agents. He sent 7,500 people to concentration camps and executed 4,000 others. After the war, he would escape to South America and wouldn't be brought to justice until 1987, dying in prison in 1991 as one of the most notorious war criminals in history. In 1942, Klaus Barbie became obsessed with finding the Limping Lady. He didn't know her real name. He didn't know her nationality. All he had was a composite sketch and the knowledge that somewhere in his city there was a woman with a prosthetic leg who was making him look like an incompetent fool in front of his Nazi superiors. Wanted posters went up across Lyon and throughout occupied France. They showed a drawing of a woman, not quite accurate because no one had gotten a good look at her, with text that read, "The enemy's most dangerous spy. We must find and destroy her." The Gestapo's internal communications were even more direct. "She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her." Barbie reportedly raged to his subordinates, "I would give anything to get my hands on that limping Canadian bitch." The irony, of course, was that Virginia wasn't Canadian at all. She was American. But the Nazis' ignorance was Virginia's greatest weapon. So how did she evade capture? Simple. She became invisible by being visible. She changed her appearance constantly. Different wigs, different makeup, different clothing. She could be 4 different women in the space of a single afternoon, each with a different name, a different cover story, a different persona. She played on the Nazis' own chauvinism and prejudices. None of the German officers early in the war believed a woman could be a spy, let alone an effective one. It simply didn't compute in their worldview. Virginia also had help from her French contacts in the police. At first, they protected her, warned her when raids were coming, looked the other way. But as the German pressure increased, those contacts became unreliable. The Gestapo was torturing people. The stakes were getting higher. Virginia could feel the net closing in. And then in November 1942, everything changed. The Allies invaded North Africa. In response, Nazi Germany broke its agreement with Vichy France and occupied the entire country. There was no more free zone. The The Germans were everywhere, and Klaus Barbie's 500 Gestapo agents were systematically hunting down every member of the resistance they could find. Virginia made a decision. She had to run. If she stayed, she would be captured, tortured, and executed. And all the networks she'd built, all the agents she'd recruited, all the operations she'd coordinated, everything would be compromised. On a cold November day in 1942, Virginia didn't tell anyone, not even her closest contacts, that she was leaving. She couldn't risk word getting out. She boarded a train from Lyon to Perpignan in the far south of France near the Spanish border. And then she prepared to do something that even hardened male agents with 2 good legs thought was nearly impossible. She was going to cross the Pyrenees Mountains on foot in the dead of winter, with a wooden leg. What happened next in Virginia Hall's escape would test every ounce of her courage, endurance, and determination. The journey across the Pyrenees would nearly kill her, and even if she survived, she'd have to face a whole new set of dangers in Spain. But this is only the beginning of Virginia Hall's story. In the next part, we're going to see how she not only escaped the Gestapo's clutches, but how she managed to get back into France and continue her war against the Nazis even after her face was on wanted posters across the entire country. If you want to know what happens next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on. Drop a comment below telling me what you think of Virginia Hall so far. And if you found this story as incredible as I do, give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you these untold stories of World War II heroism. The story of the woman who fooled the Gestapo is far from over. See you in part 2.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you need to watch part 1 first. Seriously, go watch it right now. But here's the quick version. Virginia Hall, a Baltimore socialite with a wooden leg, became the SOE's first female field agent in occupied France. She built massive intelligence networks, coordinated prison breaks, and made Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon himself, so furious that he put wanted posters of her all over France, declaring her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. By November 1942, with the Gestapo closing in and 500 agents hunting her, Virginia made the decision to flee. She boarded a train to Perpignan in southern France. Ahead of her lay one of the most daunting escape routes imaginable, a 50-mile trek across the Pyrenees Mountains in winter, on foot, with a wooden leg named Cuthbert. Most men wouldn't attempt this journey. Virginia Hall was about to prove, once again, that she wasn't most people. November in the Pyrenees is brutal. We're talking about 7,500-foot mountain passes, deep snow, sub-zero temperatures, and treacherous terrain that has killed countless people over the centuries. For someone with 2 good legs and proper winter climbing equipment, it's dangerous. For a 36-year-old woman with a prosthetic leg and minimal gear, it should have been impossible. Virginia hired a guide, someone who knew the secret paths through the mountains. But when the guide saw her, he almost refused. Take a woman? An American woman? A woman with a wooden leg? Absolutely not. It couldn't be done. She'd die in the mountains and he'd be responsible. Virginia Hall looked him in the eye and made it clear she was going with or without him. Reluctantly, the guide agreed. The journey was hell. Pure, unrelenting hell. The prosthetic leg wasn't designed for mountain climbing. Every step was agony. The wooden leg would slip on ice, catch in snowdrifts, and the straps that held it to her stump chafed and cut into her flesh until it bled. The November weather was viciously cold. Wind cut through their inadequate clothing. Snow blinded them. For 2 days and 50 miles, she climbed, descended, climbed again, crossing ridges and passes that seemed endless. When the pain became unbearable, she pushed harder. When her companions wanted to rest, she kept moving, because stopping in these conditions could mean death. At one point during the ordeal, Virginia managed to get a message out to her SOE superiors in London. Using her portable radio equipment, she transmitted, "Cuthbert is giving me trouble, but I can cope." The response from SOE headquarters would have been hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. They had no idea Cuthbert was her wooden leg. They thought Cuthbert was a person, maybe an informant or a double agent. Their reply came back, "If Cuthbert is troublesome, eliminate him."
Virginia must have laughed despite the pain. Eliminate Cuthbert? She needed Cuthbert. Without her prosthetic leg, she'd had no chance at all. After 2 days of punishing mountain travel, Virginia and her group finally crossed into Spain. They'd made it. They were out of Nazi-occupied France. They were safe. Except they weren't. Spain was officially neutral, but its fascist dictator, Francisco Franco, was sympathetic to Hitler. Spanish authorities took a dim view of refugees illegally crossing their border. Almost immediately, border guards arrested Virginia and her companions. No proper entry stamps, no authorization, off to jail. For 6 weeks, Virginia Hall sat in a Spanish prison cell. After everything she'd been through, escaping the Gestapo, climbing the Pyrenees in winter with a wooden leg, she was now locked up for paperwork violations. The irony must have been maddening. But Virginia was an American citizen, and America had diplomatic relations with Spain. She managed to get word to American officials in Barcelona. The U.S. Embassy intervened, and after 6 weeks of bureaucratic wrangling, Virginia was released. It was during her time in Spain that Virginia learned just how famous she'd become. News reached her about the Gestapo's wanted posters, the Limping Lady, the most dangerous Allied spy. She saw the composite sketch distributed across France. It wasn't very accurate, but it was close enough to be dangerous. Virginia made her way back to England in early 1943. She'd been operating behind enemy lines for 15 months, longer than any other SOE agent had managed at that point. She'd built networks that spanned southern France. She'd coordinated operations that had humiliated the Gestapo. She'd rescued a dozen imprisoned agents. She'd provided intelligence that saved countless Allied lives. When she arrived in London, King George VI quietly awarded her the MBE, the Member of the Order of the British Empire. It was a tremendous honor, one of Britain's highest civilian awards, but the ceremony was kept secret. Why? Because Virginia Hall wasn't done fighting. The SOE's commanders were amazed by what Virginia Hall had accomplished. In their official reports, they noted that this gallant lady had almost single-handedly changed their minds about the role of women in combat operations. Before Virginia Hall, women were considered incapable of operating effectively behind enemy lines. After Virginia Hall, the SOE began recruiting female agents in earnest.
But for Virginia herself, there was a problem. The SOE refused to send her back to France. It was too dangerous, they said. Her face was on wanted posters. The Gestapo knew about her. Klaus Barbie was still hunting for her. If she went back and got caught, she'd be tortured and executed. Virginia Hall begged to be sent back, argued, pleaded. She knew France better than almost any Allied operative. She had contacts there. She spoke the language perfectly. She could help prepare for the invasion everyone knew was coming, D-Day. How could they possibly sideline her now? The answer from British intelligence was firm. No. Absolutely not. Too dangerous. Virginia Hall was not the kind of woman who accepted no as a final answer. While Virginia was trying to convince the British to send her back, America created its own covert operations organization in 1942, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, under William Wild Bill Donovan. The OSS was America's first centralized intelligence agency, the predecessor to the modern CIA. And in 1943, the OSS had a problem. They had virtually no presence in occupied France. The British SOE had been operating there for years. The OSS was starting from scratch. They needed experienced operatives who knew France, who could operate behind enemy lines, who could prepare French resistance networks for the Allied invasion coming in 1944. They needed someone exactly like Virginia Hall. When Virginia learned about the OSS, she immediately applied. Wild Bill Donovan was impressed by her record and her determination. If this woman wanted to go back into Nazi-occupied France, despite being one of the Gestapo's most wanted operatives, the OSS would send her. There was just one problem. Virginia Hall was the most recognizable Allied spy in France. Her composite sketch was on wanted posters everywhere. How could she possibly operate undercover again? Virginia had a plan. She would disguise herself so completely that even people who'd known her wouldn't recognize her. First, the limp. That was her most identifiable feature. Virginia practiced walking differently, changing her gait, learning to minimize the pronounced limp that Cuthbert caused. She couldn't eliminate it entirely, but she could make it less obvious. Second, her appearance. Virginia found a makeup artist who taught her how to draw wrinkles on her face to make herself look decades older.
She found a dentist who ground down her white American teeth to make them look like the worn, yellowed teeth of a French peasant who'd never had proper dental care. She dyed her hair gray. Third, her cover story. Virginia would pose as Marcelle Montagne, an old woman who made cheese in the countryside. Her new codename, Diane. No one would suspect an elderly peasant woman of being a spy. It was the perfect disguise. In March 1944, the OSS sent Virginia back to France. Not by parachute, too risky. Instead, she traveled by British motor torpedo boat to the Brittany coast. Under cover of darkness, she climbed into a canoe with her equipment and paddled to the beach. She was back in France, back in occupied territory, back under the noses of the Gestapo agents who'd spent 2 years hunting her. This time, she was going to make sure the Nazis never knew what hit them. Virginia Hall's second tour in France was even more dangerous than her first. She wasn't in relatively safe Vichy France this time. She was in fully occupied France, where German troops were everywhere, and the Gestapo's surveillance was even more intense. She established herself in the Haute-Loire region of central France. She looked the part of an old peasant. She acted the part. She even learned the specific mannerisms and speech patterns of local farmers to blend in perfectly. German soldiers who passed her on country roads saw nothing but a bent old woman with a limp, struggling with her cheese-making equipment. They had no idea they were looking at the most wanted Allied spy in France. Virginia's mission was clear: prepare the French resistance for D-Day. The invasion was coming. Once Allied troops landed, the resistance would need to spring into action, cutting German supply lines, destroying communications infrastructure, ambushing reinforcements trying to reach the invasion beaches. Virginia got to work. She used her suitcase radio to transmit coded messages back to London in Morse code. She coordinated parachute drops of weapons, explosives, ammunition, and money. Allied planes would fly over designated drop zones at night, and French resistance fighters would retrieve the supplies.
But supplies alone weren't enough. Virginia recruited and organized more than 1,000 French fighters in her region. She taught them sabotage techniques, guerrilla warfare tactics, and how to use the weapons being dropped. She coordinated their operations, planned their missions, and kept them from being infiltrated. And she did all this while maintaining her cover as an old peasant woman. By day, she was Marcelle Montagne, shuffling around the countryside, making cheese. By night, she was Diane, coordinating paramilitary operations, transmitting intelligence to London, and planning sabotage missions. Virginia's network struck again and again. They destroyed railway bridges to prevent German reinforcements from moving efficiently. They cut telephone lines to disrupt communications. They ambushed convoys. They blew up fuel depots and ammunition dumps. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what you think. Your engagement helps this channel grow. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, and the months that followed, Virginia Howe's network was credited with killing 150 German soldiers and capturing more than 500 prisoners. Think about that. One woman, operating alone behind enemy lines with a wooden leg, organized French civilians into an effective paramilitary force that eliminated or captured 650 enemy soldiers. On June 6, 1944, D-Day arrived. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. The invasion of Europe had begun. For Virginia Howe and thousands of resistance fighters across France, this was the moment they'd been preparing for. Virginia's network sprang into action. Railway lines were destroyed, slowing German reinforcements. Communications infrastructure was taken down. Supply convoys were ambushed. The French resistance created chaos behind German lines at the exact moment when the Nazis needed stability. As Allied forces pushed deeper into France through the summer of 1944, Virginia's role evolved. She continued coordinating resistance operations, but she also began working directly with Allied military units as they liberated French towns and cities. She provided intelligence, translations, and local contacts. By the time Paris was liberated in August 1944, Virginia Howe had been operating behind enemy lines for the better part of 3 years. She'd survived countless close calls with the Gestapo. She'd organized networks spanning hundreds of miles. She'd coordinated operations that contributed directly to the Allied victory in France. And Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, the man who'd sworn he'd give anything to catch her, he never even came close. He escaped to South America after the war, but Virginia Howe won their private war, decisively.
After the liberation of France, Virginia Howell returned to Allied-controlled territory. The OSS wanted to honor her properly, so did the U.S. government. Her exploits behind enemy lines had been remarkable. In September 1945, General William Donovan, head of the OSS, presented Virginia Howell with the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest military decoration for valor. It was an incredible honor. More incredibly, Virginia was the only civilian woman to receive this award during World War II. President Harry Truman wanted to make a big deal of it. He proposed a public ceremony at the White House with full media coverage. Virginia Howell, American hero, decorated by her grateful nation. Virginia refused. She wanted a private ceremony, no publicity, no media, just her, Donovan, and her mother in Donovan's office. Why? Because, as she put it, she was still operational. She wanted to continue working in intelligence, and you can't do that effectively if your face is plastered across every newspaper in America. So the ceremony was held in private. Donovan presented the medal. They shook hands. Virginia's mother witnessed it. No fanfare, no publicity, just recognition from the people that mattered. France also recognized her contributions, awarding her the Croix de Guerre, one of France's highest military honors. Britain had already made her an MBE. But all of these ceremonies were kept quiet. Virginia Howell preferred it that way. After the war ended in 1945, Virginia Howell didn't retire. She transitioned from the OSS to its successor organization, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. She spent years working for American intelligence during the Cold War, conducting operations behind the Iron Curtain against Soviet forces. For 20 years, she served her country in the shadows, doing work that couldn't be publicized, receiving recognition that couldn't be shared with the world. Virginia Howell finally retired from the CIA in 1966 at the age of 60. She married Paul Gwilet, a former OSS colleague, and they settled into a quiet life in Maryland. When people asked her she'd done during the war, she deflected. When reporters tried to interview her, she refused. She gave no interviews, she wrote no memoirs, she spoke very little about her wartime experiences. She died in 1982 at the age of 76. Her death renewed interest in her story, but it would take decades before her contributions were fully recognized and shared with the public. Virginia Howell's story isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a testament to what one determined person can accomplish against impossible odds. She was rejected by the State Department for being a woman. She lost her leg in an accident. She was told repeatedly that she couldn't do the things she wanted to do. She proved everyone wrong. She became one of the most successful Allied operatives in World War II. She outsmarted the Gestapo for years. She saved lives, disrupted enemy operations, and contributed directly to the Allied victory in France. And she did all this while maintaining her cover as an old peasant woman. In the final part of this series, we're going deeper into Virginia's methods and techniques. How exactly did she fool the Gestapo? What were the specific tradecraft skills that kept her alive? We'll also look at the other remarkable women who followed in her footsteps and why these stories matter today. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Drop a comment telling me what surprised you most about Virginia's story so far. And if you're enjoying this series, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. The story of the woman who fooled the Gestapo continues. Don't miss the final part. See you next time.
Welcome to the final part of our series on Virginia Hall, the woman who made the Gestapo look like fools and changed intelligence warfare forever. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, stop right now and go watch them first. This story only makes sense if you know how a Baltimore socialite with a wooden leg became the Nazis' worst nightmare. We've seen Virginia build intelligence networks, escape the Gestapo by climbing the Pyrenees in winter, and return to France disguised as an old peasant to coordinate D-Day preparations. We've seen her outsmart Klaus Barbie and receive the Distinguished Service Cross. But now we're going deeper. Today, we're examining the actual techniques Virginia used, the tradecraft, the psychology, the specific methods that made her so devastatingly effective. We're also looking at the other remarkable women who followed her lead, and why these stories matter more than ever. Let's finish this story. So how exactly did Virginia Hall operate for years behind enemy lines without getting caught? What were the specific techniques that kept her alive while so many other agents were captured and executed? Let's start with her greatest skill, disguise and misdirection.
Virginia wasn't just changing wigs and makeup, she was creating completely different personas, each with a backstory, mannerisms, and speech patterns. When she was Brigitte Lecontraire, the American journalist, she was confident and professionally friendly. When she was Marcel Montagnier, the old peasant cheesemaker, she shuffled, spoke in rural French dialect, and had the bent posture of someone who'd spent decades doing hard physical labor. This wasn't acting. This was life or death psychological warfare. Virginia understood that people see what they expect to see. Gestapo agents expected spies to be young, fit, suspicious, nervous. They didn't expect spies to be elderly women complaining about arthritis. Virginia gave them exactly what they didn't expect, making her invisible. The disguise for her second tour was particularly brilliant. She had makeup artists teach her how to draw realistic wrinkles on her face. She had a dentist grind down her teeth to match French peasants who'd never had dental care. She dyed her hair gray. She wore shapeless clothing that hid her figure. She practiced walking with a more pronounced shuffle that made her prosthetic leg seem like just another aspect of old age. But the physical disguise was only half of it. Virginia also changed her behavior patterns. She learned the rhythms of rural French life, when you wake up, when you go to the market, how you interact with neighbors. She became fluent not just in French, but in French culture so deeply that even locals couldn't tell she wasn't one of them. One of Virginia's most crucial skills was radio operation. In World War II, long-distance covert communication was incredibly difficult. You couldn't just pick up a phone. You had to use radio transmitters that were bulky, temperamental, and dangerous. Virginia's suitcase radio looked like ordinary luggage, but inside was a sophisticated transmitter and receiver. She could send coded messages in Morse code back to SOE or OSS headquarters in London. But using it required extraordinary skill and caution. First, the technical challenge. Morse code isn't easy, especially when transmitting complex intelligence under stress. You have to be fast and accurate. Virginia was both, which made her invaluable. Second, the security challenge. When you transmit on radio, you broadcast an electromagnetic signal that can be detected. The Nazis had mobile detection units that would triangulate resistance transmissions. If they detected your signal, Gestapo agents would investigate. Many Allied radio operators, called pianists, were caught this way. Virginia solved this through constant movement and timing. She never transmitted from the same location twice in a row. She kept transmissions brief. She used different frequencies and times of day. She made herself a moving target the Nazi detection units couldn't pin down. Third, the coding challenge. Messages had to be encrypted, so even if intercepted, the Nazis couldn't read them. Virginia used complex coding systems, essentially doing advanced cryptography in her head while hiding from the Gestapo. The mental workload was enormous, but she managed it flawlessly for years. Perhaps Virginia's greatest skill was understanding human psychology. She knew what made people trust or distrust others. She knew how to read body language, detect lies, and manipulate perceptions. Consider her approach to recruiting agents. Building an intelligence network means convincing people to risk their lives. Some of Virginia's contacts faced torture and execution if they caught. Why would they take that risk? Because Virginia understood motivation.
She appealed to patriotism, the desire to free France from Nazi occupation. She appealed to revenge. Many had lost family to German brutality. She appealed to practical needs. The resistance provided money, food, and protection. And she built genuine personal connections. People worked with Virginia because they trusted her, liked her, and believed in what she was trying to accomplish. Virginia also understood the Gestapo's psychology and weaponized it against them. She knew the Nazis were arrogant and dismissive toward women. She used that prejudice as camouflage. She knew the Gestapo expected spies to be nervous and evasive. She acted confident and open. She knew they were looking for young, fit operatives. She disguised herself as old and frail. There's a fascinating example from her second tour. Virginia was on a train stopped at a German checkpoint. Gestapo agents boarded, checking papers and looking for resistance members. Virginia, traveling as Marcel Montagnier, didn't avoid the officer's gaze or act nervous. Instead, she complained loudly about the inconvenience, about how her cheese-making work was being disrupted. She was annoying, exactly what a grumpy old French peasant would be. The Gestapo officer checked her papers quickly and moved on, eager to escape the complaining old woman. He never suspected he'd just let the most dangerous Allied spy slip through his fingers. That's psychological warfare at its finest. Virginia's intelligence networks were extraordinarily creative. She didn't just recruit obvious resistance fighters, she built networks using people the Nazis would never suspect. Take the beekeepers. Virginia recruited them to smuggle weapons and explosives across German checkpoints. Why? Because German soldiers were afraid of bees. Carts loaded with beehives would roll through checkpoints and guards would wave them through without searching, terrified of disturbing the bees. Meanwhile, hidden underneath were guns, ammunition, explosives, and radio equipment. Brilliantly simple and devastatingly effective. Or the brothel owner in Lyon during Virginia's first tour. Prostitutes working in establishments frequented by German officers overheard extraordinary amounts of intelligence, troop movements, strategic plans, officers' gossip. The women would report to the brothel owner, who passed it to Virginia, who encoded it and transmitted it to London. The Nazis never suspected their most significant intelligence leaks came from the women they paid to entertain them. Virginia also recruited priests and nuns. Religious institutions provided perfect cover. Churches could hide downed pilots, store weapons, and serve as communication nodes. Priests traveling between parishes could carry messages without suspicion. Virginia's network included dozens of religious figures who used their positions to support Allied operations. This network diversity was crucial. If the Gestapo infiltrated one part of Virginia's network, they couldn't bring down the whole operation because different cells were compartmentalized. The beekeepers didn't know about the prostitutes. The priests didn't know about the railway workers. Even if someone was captured and tortured, they couldn't reveal what they didn't know. Virginia Hall didn't operate in isolation. Her success opened doors for other remarkable women who served as SOE agents. These women deserve recognition too. Odette Sansom, a French-born woman working for British SOE, was captured by the Gestapo in 1943. She was brutally tortured, her toenails pulled out, a red-hot poker pressed against her back. Despite this horror, she revealed nothing. Her response to every question, "I have nothing to say." She survived Ravensbrück concentration camp and became the only living woman to receive the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for gallantry. Noor Inayat Khan, a British Indian Muslim woman, became the first female wireless operator sent from Britain to occupied France. She operated in Paris during the most dangerous periods. For several months in 1943, she was the only SOE radio operator still functioning in Paris as the Gestapo hunted down others. She was eventually betrayed, captured, and revealed nothing under interrogation. She was executed at Dachau in September 1944. Her last word was liberté. She was posthumously awarded the George Cross. Christine Granville, born in Poland, was Britain's first and longest-serving female special agent. She skied across the Carpathians into Poland to deliver British propaganda. She parachuted into occupied France. In one incredible operation, she secured the release of 3 Allied agents 2 hours before their scheduled execution by convincing their Gestapo captors that the Allies were about to overrun the area and they'd be executed as war criminals. It worked. She saved 3 lives through sheer audacity and brilliant bluffing. Violet Sabo, a British-French woman, parachuted into France twice. On her second mission, she was captured after a fierce firefight where she provided covering fire so her colleagues could escape. She was tortured, sent to Ravensbrück, and executed in early 1945.
She was posthumously awarded the George Cross. The SOE sent 41 female agents to France during World War II. 26 survived, 15 did not. Those 15 were executed by firing squad, lethal injection, or in gas chambers. They died as heroes, though many stories remained classified for decades.
So why were these female agents so effective? Why did Virginia Hall and women like her succeed where many male agents failed? The answer is uncomfortable but important. Sexism helped them. The Nazis' own prejudices became their greatest vulnerability. German officers and Gestapo agents simply couldn't believe women could be effective spies, saboteurs, or guerrilla fighters. This cultural blindness meant female agents could operate with invisibility that male agents never achieved. Virginia Hall used this devastatingly. When Gestapo officers saw her as an American journalist, they saw a harmless woman doing a feminine job. When they saw her as an old peasant, they saw someone beneath notice. In both cases, they saw what their prejudices expected, and they completely missed the deadly effective operative hiding in plain sight. But it wasn't just sexism that made these women effective. They also brought different skills to intelligence work. Many female SOE agents had abilities that made them excellent spies: fluency in language, cultural adaptability, attention to detail, ability to read social situations, and talent for building relationships. They could move through society in ways men couldn't, accessing information and building networks that would have been impossible for male agents. The combination of being underestimated by the enemy and genuinely talented at intelligence work made these women extraordinarily dangerous to the Nazi regime. For decades after her death in 1982, Virginia Hall remained relatively unknown outside intelligence circles. But as SOE and OSS documents were declassified in the 1990s and 2000s, historians uncovered the full scope of her accomplishments. What they found astonished them. Today, Virginia Hall is studied at intelligence training facilities worldwide. The CIA's Virginia Hall Exponentiary Center trains field operatives in skills she pioneered. Her methods of building networks, maintaining cover, and operating behind enemy lines are still taught as examples of excellent tradecraft. In 2019, Maryland inducted her into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame. The French and British ambassadors have honored her memory. The intelligence community recognizes her as a pioneer who proved women could operate effectively in the most dangerous aspects of intelligence and military work. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition comes from the women who followed in her footsteps. Female CIA officers, military intelligence specialists, and special operations personnel know Virginia Hall's story. They understand she opened doors that had been closed. She proved what was possible. She made it easier for every woman who came after her to be taken seriously in fields that had been exclusively male. What can we learn from Virginia Hall's story? Why does a spy from World War II matter to us today? First, determination matters more than circumstances. Virginia had every excuse to give up, every reason to accept limitations others placed on her. She refused. That refusal changed history. How many people today accept artificial limitations on what they can accomplish? Second, your perceived weaknesses can be your greatest strengths. Virginia's wooden leg should have been a crippling disability for a spy. Instead, it became part of her identity that helped her network recognize her while making the Gestapo search more difficult. She turned a disadvantage into a strategic advantage. Third, being underestimated is an advantage if you know how to use it. People's prejudices create blind spots. Virginia exploited those blind spots ruthlessly. In any competitive situation, being underestimated means your opponents aren't preparing adequately for what you're capable of doing. Fourth, expertise comes from dedication, not natural talent. Virginia wasn't a born spy. She developed her skills through training, practice, and experience. She learned languages through years of study. She mastered radio operation through practice. She perfected disguise by observing people carefully. Excellence came from work, not genetics. Fifth, the best work often goes unrecognized. Virginia received the DSC, MBE, and Croix de Guerre, but insisted on private ceremonies. She understood that real achievement doesn't require public applause. She did extraordinary things not for recognition, but because they needed to be done.
There's a broader point about historical memory. For decades, World War II history focused almost exclusively on male soldiers, generals, and leaders. The beaches of Normandy, the tank battles, the air combat. These stories are important and deserve to be told. But they're not the whole story. Women like Virginia Hall, Odette Sansom, Noor Inayat Khan, and dozens of others were fighting that war too. They were behind enemy lines, conducting sabotage. They were gathering intelligence that shaped Allied strategy. They were organizing resistance movements. They were risking and often losing their lives in the fight against fascism. These stories were kept secret during the war for operational security, then stayed secret after because of Cold War classification. Then they were simply forgotten because historical narratives tend to focus on traditional military operations and male protagonists. But these stories matter. They matter because they're true. They matter because they reveal a more complete picture of how World War II was actually fought and won. They matter because they show women have always been capable of extraordinary courage, skill, and effectiveness in the most dangerous situations. And they matter because they inspire current and future generations. Let's return to where we started. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, raging about that limping Canadian bitch he could never catch. The greatest manhunt the Gestapo ever conducted in France. 500 agents, wanted posters everywhere, the full resources of the Nazi occupation, all focused on capturing one woman. They failed. Virginia Hall outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, and continued her operations right under their noses. That's the legacy. One woman with a wooden leg named Cuthbert became the most dangerous Allied spy in France. She built networks spanning hundreds of miles. She coordinated operations that killed or captured 650 enemy soldiers. She provided intelligence that shaped Allied strategy. She survived years behind enemy lines when the Gestapo had her at the top of their most wanted list. And she did it all without seeking fame, without writing memoirs, without demanding recognition. Virginia Hall was a hero in the truest sense. Not because she was perfect or invincible, but because when her country needed her, she answered the call. When obstacles appeared, she found ways around them. When people told her she couldn't do something, she proved them wrong. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous spy. They were right. Not because she was the most physically powerful or technically skilled, but because she was the most determined, the most adaptable, and the most impossible to stop. She was dangerous because she refused to be limited by what others thought was possible. Klaus Barbie never caught her. The Gestapo never stopped her, and history will never forget her. If you've made it to the end of this 3-part series, thank you for taking this journey with me. Virginia Hall's story deserves to be known, and by watching, sharing, and engaging, you're helping ensure her legacy continues. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what you learned from Virginia's story. Share this series with someone who needs to hear it. Your daughters, sisters, friends, anyone who's ever been told they can't do something because of who they are. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the untold stories of World War II heroism, the operations, people, and moments that changed history but didn't make it into most history books. If you want more content like this, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories, and thank you for helping ensure heroes like Virginia Hall are never forgotten. The greatest heroes are often the ones history tried to forget. It's our job to remember them. Drop a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one. Love you.